Hey, welcome back to the channel and episode 4 of our read-along book club of Steven Erikson's Gardens of the Moon. I know we're moving slow, folks. I know these videos are late, but I promise you, I will get back on track. I will get back on schedule, and I believe chapters 5 and 6 are short enough to where we can tackle 2 in 1 week. So that's going to be my plan. I haven't looked ahead. Somebody on the Discord let me know that they appear to be shorter, so I think that's what we're going to do. I may regret it. I may regret it. But anyway, let us talk about chapter 4. Well, before I get on with that, let's talk about sort of my initial thoughts, what I think about the book so far, because I feel like we're coming to a pivotal point, right? We're ending part 1 of this book. I can't remember how many parts, like 6 or 7 or something like that. But you can tell that this piece is definitely a self-contained narrative chunk to a degree. At least that's what it seems to be, which is why maybe chapter 4 felt so long to me. I don't believe, from what I've been told, is that it was much longer. I didn't check myself. I probably should have. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of POV shifts, a lot of scene breaks. And on that note, I'd like to talk about some of the things that, or one of the things anyway, that's kind of good and kind of bad. And that is honestly a lot of these scene breaks. And with that comes POV shifts, right? What I like about that is it kind of reminds us of things, right? Because we're experiencing an event or a series of events by one POV. And then generally those things are sort of echoed or carried through or reflected upon in the next scene or POV or whatever it may be. The thing I don't like about it is that it is repetitive, right? So it's kind of strange, and it seemed to stand out more to me here in chapter 4 than any of the other chapters. And I think it's because there were so many POV shifts, right? So we'll be reminded of one thing in one plot in one POV section. We'll have another character reflect about something we already know. Kind of starts to remove some of the mystery to it, right? And this is definitely a difficult balancing act, I think, when you're writing something of this scale, right? This epic fantasy fiction, is that it's how much do you want to remind the reader and how much do you want to just say it once and hopefully they get it? And I guess the irony there is that Steven Erikson seems to drop a lot of bombs on us without us having really any kind of prior knowledge to it. And so he just doesn't wait for us to catch up. He just keeps going with the story. But then on the other hand, specifically again with this chapter, we have a lot of reminders there, which in itself is going to be ironic because this chapter, I had a very busy week. And so this chapter took me a few days to get through, which means I'm probably going to forget some stuff. But that is why I have you out there, lovely viewers, to correct me, to remind me in the comments on the Discord, so other people finding this video will be completely filled in. And I know there's some massive malazan, however you want to say it, experts out there who are following along. So I'm glad to have you too, because as much fun as it is to discover this stuff on my own, it's so much more helpful getting a new perspective, or a correct perspective, I should say, on things that I might have missed. In fact, there is something I'd like to call out right now, and that is the way chapter 3 ended, right, where we had Perrin murdered outside in an alleyway somewhere in the city of Pale. And I was confused by the mention of a female, the girl, being Sari herself. And a couple of you out there did remind me that she was possessed by Cotillion. I believe it's Cotillion. It could be Amanus. So another thing to correct me on. And so therein lied my confusion, right? Because I didn't quite understand what was going on in that. I think because originally when this happened to her, I knew she was sort of created into a puppet, essentially, right? A very much not the same kind of puppet that Hairlock is, but a puppet that these gods, I guess, can control, or maybe not gods, but powers. Again, another thing I'm not very clear on at this time. But I wasn't sure if they were literally possessing her or just kind of like casting a spell on her and using her as like this conduit or an ability to scry. But anyway, thank you for that. Please, as always, correct me as we go. So another thing that I'm not a huge fan of, or wasn't a huge fan of, is the way they handled Perrin's death in this. So death to me in books is a way to provide stakes, right? As always, because as far as we know, we have one life, right? I know there are people out there who believe otherwise, but generally in fiction and in life, when somebody dies, it's a big deal, right? And so Perrin died. He went to this other world, right? Through these warrens, I guess. He was on the precipice of death's door, literally, right? And then he was brought back. If you will recall, I did not think his death was a big deal in chapter 3 because he seems to be a very pivotal character in the story. And it appears as if he's killed here just to sort of illuminate what the other side is. Gods or Death Throne, I think. Is that right? Maybe Death's Helper. Anyway. And the two twins, of course. But I'm getting too deep into this. I just wanted to briefly mention that killing a character to just kind of show world building is a bit of a weak method, in my opinion. Okay, so I know this is a very long series, and maybe it's going to echo back to me if I ever get to the end, and it's all going to make sense and it's all going to feel impactful. But what really grounds me in a book, or what really ties me to stories, are the characters, right? It's sticking with them. It's empathizing with them. It is worrying about them dying and never showing up again. And I feel like this was a bit stolen from us, that emotional connection. That's all I'm going to say about it. I know this is a very long introduction. So let us dig into this more, and I'll probably bring it up again because I like to be redundant, apparently, just like Erikson did in chapter 4. So let us begin with chapter 4, and we begin, as always, with one of these passages. They were of a kind then, the histories writ large in tattooed tracery, the tales a tracking of old wounds. But something glowed hard in their eyes, those flame-not arches, that vanishing span. They are their own past, each in turn destined to fall in line on the quiet wayside, beside the river they refuse to name. The bridge burners. Which I'm actually getting attached to those guys. I really love this group of characters because they're bound by duty, they're bound by friendship, they're bound by blood, really. And I think for me right now, those are the strongest group of characters I'm connecting with. We also see a familiar name, Tok, I'm not quite sure, the younger. So he is the gentleman that helped Perrin out in chapter 3 and said to seek him out in case he needs his help. So there's a lot of highlights here, right? A lot of highlights. This is really sort of laying out this chapter, this POV shift right here. Well, where we open up with Tattersall is really starting to put everything together. It's a way to communicate the plot so far, who's after who and why, etc., what the speculation is. I'm probably going to miss some things because I don't want this to be a 3-hour video, but let us begin at the beginning. Tattersall glared at Whiskey Jack. "Hairlock's insane," she pronounced. "That edge to him was always there, but he's chewed holes in his own warrens, and he's tasting chaos. Worse yet, it's making him more powerful, more dangerous." And so all of them have gathered in Tattersall's quarters, which consisted of an outer room where they now sat. But Quick Ben replies, and I love this line, "But that's to be expected. Fairness tale, lady. He's got a body of a puppet. Of course that twisted him." And we do know that we get to meet Hairlock, and I was so excited to see him again because it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous seeing this puppet walk around, or imagine this puppet walk around. So this is like one of my favorite parts of this book, I think, or aspects of the story. So this is where we find out that Hairlock is kind of in these warrens. He's snooping around. He's trying to find out literally what Kalam says, who in the Empire wants them dead, these bridge burners. But then they talk about the problems, the inherent problems of these warrens, like when Quick Ben says the regular paths are all tripwired. But Hairlock's using the power of chaos, the paths that lie between the warrens. And that's unhealthy, not just for him, but for all of us. So he's using this these secret ways, I guess, but it's dangerous apparently. It weakens the warrens, it frays the fabric, which in turn allows Hairlock to break into them at will and out again. But the sorceress, she is frustrated. Tattersall is frustrated when she says, "Tayshran's the one you're looking for, I've already told you." But Quick Ben doesn't believe it's enough. He wants to know more details, right? So he wants to know how many agents there are. And again, we kind of end up in a place where all these characters are arguing about like what the motivations are, how many people are after them regarding Tayshran, how many agents it is, who else might be there in the Warrens trying to hunt them down. And this is when Tattersall flat out asks them, if Hairlock unravels the whole thing for you, then what? Do you intend to try to kill Tayshran and everyone else involved? But if you think I'm going to help you without knowing what you're planning, you're mistaken. So they're hiding some things from her. If it was just your survival at stake, why don't you just desert? And I'm glad that was brought up because I've wanted the same thing, I believe previously. Why don't these guys just bail, right? I mean, if they're being hunted down by this high mage, like, why don't you just leave? Forget it. Drop your duty. Quick Ben does kind of answer here when he says, not exactly what they're planning to do, but generally anyway. "We're not going to challenge Tayshran directly. That would be suicide. No, we'll cut away his support carefully with precision, then we'll arrange his fall from grace." And this is another development here that I enjoyed when Tattersall, internally, of course, my favorite, says, "All very well, but you didn't answer me." So Tattersall looked at the other black-skinned man, her eyes narrowing. "You were a claw once, weren't you?" And so this is planting the seed of distrust, right? Because if he's been a claw before, who knows what he's up to. But Whiskey Jack, he breaks in. "Quick Ben doesn't usually foul things too badly." He made a sour face. "I admit I'm not completely convinced either, but I've learned to trust him. You can take that for whatever it's worth. Quick Ben continues with Hairlock being their only hope, but Whiskey Jack, he flat out says this as well. Back to Hairlock, you don't trust him. And she says no. And so what is the bargaining piece that the bridge burners give her? It's when Whiskey Jack says, all right, sorceress, we'll give you this. Quick Ben, tell her about Sorry. But Tattersall remembers her, right? She's a tough one to forget, as she says. And we also get Virgin of Death. So this is part of her Fatigued, I believe it was, her tarot card dealing. And that's another thing I forgot to mention. That seems to all symbolically be coming together right now. All of the symbolism she was drawing in these cards and predicting the future or whatever it may be, all that symbolism is manifesting definitely in this chapter. And this is taking us back to, I believe, chapter 1 when they're talking about her being one of the usual sweeps across the Empire's heartland. Seems a company of cavalry hit something hard, no survivors. As for what they ran into, it had something to do with dogs, Kalam finished without missing a beat. So this is where he found all those dead soldiers, all the dead people that looked like they've been killed by dogs, right? Because I think it was Perrin or somebody was saying that they would have to be the size of a mule, and we do meet a dog, a hound that is the size of a mule in this chapter. And then we are reminded again with the stuff that I was kind of glancing over, but Tattersall mentions, the fatigue showed me dogs and sorcery. Into her mind returned the image of the rope as she had seen it in the reading. High House Shadow, ruled by Shadow Throne and the rope, and in their service, the 7 hounds of shadow. She looked to Whiskey Jack, but the sergeant's eyes remained downcast, his expression blank as stone. So we remember, I believe it was Cotillion who sent his hounds looking in the warrens, and we get to meet them, or at least 1 or 2 of them in this chapter. And Quick Ben continues, the hounds hunted, that's our guess, but it's a good one. The 19th Regiment of the 8th Cavalry were all killed, even their horses. A league's worth of coastline settlements needed repopulating. So again, we're reminded here of chapter 1. I think this is a good method for that because these chapters are very long and these events are so far apart, right? I mean, not really, but I mean, for the sake of a novel's worth, I guess, because we're about 25% through with a novel. And essentially this entire chapter is sort of putting the pieces together for us, I guess, in case we didn't quite get it. But then finally, Kalam finishes with, we're pretty sure Sorry is somehow involved with House Shadow. And then Kalam continues, Shadow Throne is a companion, the patron of assassins. Cotillion were unheard of before Kellenved and Dancer's deaths. It also seems that whatever disagreement there is between House Shadow and Empress Lessine is personal. So we're starting to hypothesize about not only relationships, but motives. But we finish with Quick Ben just simply stating, in any case, we believe Sorry is connected with House Shadow. But Whiskey Jack is not convinced, and I believe there's something here about him thinking she is just a product of a twisted world, right? She's been twisted by war, by death, by all of these things into what she is. And he tries to really stand up for her, even though, we know she's evil. And I think that's an interesting approach, like I said, and when you're reading a book and you have all of these different POVs, we already know a lot of this stuff, right? We've seen a lot of it. And so it's interesting to see it internalized by characters, right? And part of me likes that omniscient point of view where we kind of know everything pretty much, but then part of me doesn't because it does eliminate some of the mystery. So I think Erikson does manage to not give us everything all the time. And I think also that this chapter 4, because it is sort of a landmark in this book, right? It's a section in itself that it's important for him to make the reader understand what's going on. Tattersall gives a little bit of history when she says, back in 7 cities, she said quietly, the story goes that Emperor's first sword, his commander of his armies, Dasim Ultor, had accepted a god's offer. Hood made Dasim then his knight of death. Then something happened. Something went wrong. And Dasim renounced the title, swore a vow of vengeance against Hood, against the Lord of Death himself. All at once, the other ascendants started meddling, manipulating events. It all culminated with Dasim's murder, then the Emperor's assassination, and blood in the streets, temples at war, sorceries unleashed. She singles out Whiskey Jack when she says, you were there. But internally, she's thinking about, and you don't want it to happen again, here and now. You think if you can deny that Sorry serves Shadow, your conviction will be enough to shape reality. You need to believe that to save your sanity, because there are some things in life you just can't go through only once. Oh, Whiskey Jack, I can't ease your burden. You see, I think Quick Ben and Kalam are right. If Shadow has claimed the girl, the trail will be evident. Hairlock will find it. One thing I do like is that she only vocalized the beginning and the end of that, whereas us as the reader understand why she thinks he's feeling a certain way. What I don't like about it is I feel like the scene might have been more powerful with some subtext. But even though the fact that we do know everything that's going on essentially at this point, more or less, not the bigger design, but sort of how things are fitting in with the plot and their opposition. It's a little bit on the nose for me. It's a little bit on the nose, but again, I think it's a tough balancing act. Trying to figure out like what to keep from the reader and what to give them. And then Fiddler, he's pacing. Something's up when he says, "Got a bad feeling," the man muttered. "Something's wrong. Not here though, but close by. It's just." He stopped, cocking his head, then sighed, resuming his uneasy walk. Not sure. And we find out that he was the one who, saved our lives in the tunnel, he explained. One of his bad feelings. So when all of these bridge burners were digging these tunnels underneath Pale, he was the one that alerted them to evacuate. And then we finished this scene with the bridge burners leaving. Tattersail righted her chairs, then refilled her goblet with wine. High house shadow and a knife in the dark. A new game's begun. Or the old ones just turn. So let me know in the comments, did I miss anything? I probably did in this scene that was probably important to bring up. But next in this scene, we are brought to Perrin. Perrin opened his eyes in bright, hot sunlight, but the sky above him was wrong. He saw no sun. The yellow glare was sharp yet sourceless. Heat gusted down on him with oppressive weight. So he's in this sort of in-between world, this purgatory, this land where he is supposed to be taken to the afterlife by death or by this death throne, I think. But he's not. And who do we see? And this kind of helps fill in what Opon is. Opon, something like that. But we see a dozen paces away, the flat plain that was neither grass nor earth rose and arched, gateway leading to nothing. I've seen such gates before. Nothing so large, I think, as this one. None looking quite like this thing. And twisted upright, yet from its position sideways, the gate was not, he realized, made of stone. Bodies, naked human figures, carved likenesses? No. Oh no. The figures moved, groaned, slowly writhed in place. So this is pretty cool. It's like this crazy gateway of all these twisted bodies. I mean, that's probably what the gateway to the death realm should be like, I imagine. But now we find the twins, right? Above him stood a young man and a woman, twins. And these are the two twins we were talking about, this couple that we've been told the names of, but didn't really know who they were talking about, or in fact, if they're real people. That's another weird thing, too, is that I think early on in the series, I was talking about in fantasy, there's typically gods, right? There's worship, there's religion of some kind. Usually it's a pantheon of gods. It's a group of gods. It's not a singular god. But the main thing is that sometimes that connection to that realm or to those gods isn't shown whatsoever, right? Maybe they don't exist. Maybe it's just ideas concocted by the people who are living, the humans or whatever race they might be. Here we find out that there is a very direct connection with these gods. So not quite sure how I feel about it. It is what it is, right? But I guess I'm more of a fan of keeping that stuff behind the veil, right? Teasing it out, making it a mystery. Don't just show all your cards at once, literally, right? And I know that's subjective. I know that's just my personal opinion, but I thought I would bring it up because, again, one thing I love about fantasy, right, is the escapism, the magic nature to it, but also the mystery of it, right? Because usually we're depicting these grand worlds as big or bigger than our own that are full of things that are very, very different, magic, of course. And I think there's a power in something profound with awe, right? And then when you're just given that in, what are we, chapter 4 already, it's a little bit of a letdown for me. I know, again, differing opinions. I know, that's okay. But what happens? So these twins speak to Perrin. It was the man who'd spoken. He smiled without humor down at Perrin. We've long admired your, his eyes widened, sword, a smirk in her tone. And so this is pretty much how he gains passage back, is that he's definitely a chosen one, so to speak. Far more subtle than, say, a coin, don't you think? The man smiled, turned mocking. Most, he said, swinging his head to study the ghastly edifice of the gate. Don't pause here. It's said there was a cult once, in the habit of drowning victims in bogs. I imagine Hood finds them aesthetically pleasing. So that's cool. There's a little bit of history or meaning behind the door, not just to creep us out, but there's an actual reason behind it. So I do appreciate that. And Perrin, like us, asked them, why then have I not passed through Hood's gate, if that is what it is? And the woman, we're meddling, the woman said. Opon, the twins of chance, and my sword, my untested blade, purchased years ago, with a name I chose so capriciously. What does Opon want from me? Only the stumbling, ignorant thing you call life, dear boy. The trouble with ascendants is that they try to rig every game. Of course, we delight in uncertainty. And then the other twin says, oops, the man said. Come to make certain things, I'd say. We'd best leave, sister. Sorry, Captain, but it seems you'll pass through the gate after all. Maybe, the woman said. Her brother rounded on her. We agreed, no confrontation. Confrontation's messy, unpleasant. I despise discomforting scenes. Besides, the ones who come don't play fair. Then neither do we, the sister snapped. She turned to the gate, raised her voice. Lord of Death, we would speak with you. Hood! And Perrin rolled his head, watched as a bent, limping figure emerged from the gate. Wearing rags, the figure slowly approached. Perrin squinted. An old woman, a child with drool on its chin, a deformed young girl, a stunted broken trail, a desiccated Tiste Andi. And this apparition cocks its head and says, You have chosen, it said in a quavering voice, unimaginatively. You are not, Hood, the brother scowled. Bones shifted under the creaking skin. The Lord is busy. Busy? We do not take kindly to insults, the sister said. The apparition cackled and stopped abruptly. How unfortunate. A mellifluous, deep-throated laugh would be more to my liking. Ah, well, in answer, nor does my lord appreciate your interruption of the natural passage of a soul. Murdered at the hand of a god, the sister said. That makes him fair game. So I think that means that Cotillion is a god, I guess? Correct me in the comments, please. And so because they are the twins of chance, they are speaking of uncertainty. And the creature cackled again and again cut it short. Reciprocity. Of course, the sister responded. I'll look for another, a death premature, meaningless even. Someone close to you shall walk through the gates. Oh, but the apparition says, Much sorrow, alas, the apparition said. Someone close to you shall walk through death's gates in your place. This is another shortcoming for me, is that we've only met one person that is close to Perrin, and we don't know her very well. We've heard of Felison, but we don't know her either. She seems to be close to Perrin, and this makes him upset, right? He doesn't want this to happen, but again, because we're not privy to this fact, we don't know these characters, we don't feel for them, it's kind of weightless, right? There's no weight to this wager or this reciprocity. And this is when we see these hounds. So sighing, Perrin craned his head around. He saw a pair of hounds, massive hulking creatures, dark, tongues lolling as they sat watching him. These are what killed the company at Itko Khan. These are the cursed, horrifying beasts. Both hounds froze, head hunching up toward him, as if seeing the hatred in his eyes. Perrin felt his heart go cold at their avid attention. He was slow to realize he had bared his teeth. Then we see this shadow separating from these two hounds. The stain vaguely man-shaped and translucent, the shadow spoke. The one lone sent. I would have thought someone of ability. Though it must be said, you died well. Evidently not, Perrin comes back. So the guy's like basically seeing all these crazy things, these apparitions, these godlike creatures, the ascendants, I guess, made flesh, and he's being his cocky self. So he decided to get a little joke in there, or a little jab at the very least. Ah, yes, the shadow said, and so it falls to me to complete the task. Busy hours, these. And then something crackled in the portalway of the gate, shadow thrown, and the hounds flinched. Perrin continued, wondering at his own courage to bait these ascendants. Always despise authority, didn't I? Just what I said. Halfway between life and death, this promise cost me nothing, you see. Liar, the only warrant that can touch you now is death, Perrin said. Of course, he added, someone else interceded and was certain to leave long before you and your two loud hounds arrived. The king of High House Shadow edged forward. Who? What does it plan? Who opposes us? Find your own answers, Shadow Throne. You do understand, don't you, that if you send me on my way now, your opposition will seek other means. Knowing nothing of who their next tool is, how will you sniff out their next move? You'll be left darting shadows. Easier to follow you, the god conceded. I must speak with my companion. And he finishes with, if you stand, you walk, one way only. You have a reprieve, and if Hood comes to gather you to your feet, the guiding hand is his, not ours. Excellent. And if you live, so shall my shadow follow you. And Perrin grunts, my shadow's a crowded place these days. His eyes fell once again on the hounds. The creatures watched him still, their eyes faint coals. I'll have you yet. As if fanned by a silent promise, the red glows sharpened. The god resumed speaking, but the world had darkened around Perrin, fading, dwindling until the voice was gone. and with all awareness but the faint renewed spinning of a coin. And I do like that, how it's coming back to the spinning coin, and I believe we end this chapter that way as well. An unknown span of time passed in which Perrin wandered through memories he had thought long lost. And so this is when literally his life is flashing before his eyes. So we don't really get any specifics here. We just get little glimpses, images of things that don't really mean too much to us. And someone was busy reordering the formative events of his life, turning them on end and casting them into the present new shadows. Somehow the guiding hand played with him, with his life. So he is a pawn, right? We have so many pawns in this book. I guess that is the way when you're dealing with gods and kings and queens and emperors and empresses, right? We have a lot of pawns to deal with. But then we are immediately taken back to the real world when we see, Hood, take him. A face bent close to Perrin's own looked in his open blank eyes. The face was Picker's. This is the woman when he was asserting himself as the captain trying to find the bridge burners. This is the person he met up with or questioned anyway. And she warned him already that the first blood to be spilled would be his own. And indeed, she was correct. He didn't stand a chance. So we have Sergeant Anstey here, and they are just getting him together to go heal him, get him some help. And we find out how much time has passed here when Picker says, "Now how come you're still bleeding, Captain? Those knife wounds are at least an hour old." Boots pounded on the cobbles off to her right, and her head whipped around. "Healer! The bastard's alive." So again, they're off to get help for him. And next we are meeting up with these Marines, or these bridge burners are being a little sneaky. So the third bell after midnight tolled sonorously through the city of Pale, echoing down the streets emptied by the curfew. A light rain had begun, casting the night sky with murky gold hue. In front of the large rambling estate, 2 blocks from the old palace that had become part of the second's quarters, 2 Marines wrapped in black rain capes, I like that, instead of raincoats. Could have been rain cloaks, maybe. Stood guard outside the main gate. And they're just, as guards doing fantasy things, they're just talking about the weather. "Damn miserable night, ain't it?" one said, shivering. And the other shifted his pike to his left shoulder and hawked a mouthful of phlegm. Another familiar trope from guards in the evening. "You just guess in mind," he said, wagging his head. "Any other brilliant insights you feel ready to toss my way, you just speak up here." "What did I do?" the first man demanded, hurt. Finally, our fellow bridge burners I was just talking about show up. The man took a step closer. His name is Kalam Bridge Burners, the 9th, he said quietly. He continues with, "We didn't expect to be coming back. As for our business, well, it's better that Tashrin don't know about it. You with me, soldier?" And they recognize him. They recognize him in relation to Whiskey Jack. And he says, "We're bringing in a body," Kalam said. "But this never happened on your shift." "Hood's gate no," the second Marine said, "peaceful as the 7th dawn." And these Marines are with him when the other one shrugged. "Hope it'll stick something hard and sharp up Tashrin. Hood take the treacherous murderer. And knowing them bridge burners, that's exactly what they'll do." I'm really excited to see the bridge burners at work, because we haven't really yet, right? It's been a lot of talking. It's been a lot of walking around, but we haven't seen them act as a unit, be the badasses they allegedly are. But then before he goes, the bridge burner threw him a sharp look. "You see a woman come after us, you get out of her way, you hear me?" Now we are back with Tattersail. So Tattersail stared long and hard at the cards centered on the field she had laid down. She had chosen a spiral pattern, working her way through the entire deck of dragons and arriving with a final card, which could mark either an apex or an epiphany, depending on how it placed itself. The spiral had become a pit, a tunnel downward, and at its root, something distant and shadow-hazed, waiting the image of a hound. She sensed an immediacy to this reading. High House Shadow had become involved. In the house of death, the mason was the builder of barrows, this placer of stones, this promise of death, not to one or a few, but many. So this is more of her putting pieces together, stuff that we don't quite understand, really. But she does have a realization here when she says, "Blood," she murmured, "ever flows downward. The mason shaping a barrow, after all, he is death's servant, and he will touch me directly. That barrow, is it mine? Do I back out? Abandon the bridge burners to their fate? Flee from Tashrin? From the Empire?" And once again, she walked the muddy streets of the village where she had been born, a child bearing the talent. Oh yeah, this is where we learn about her history. I forgot about that. A child who had been seeing the horsemen of war sweeping down into their sheltered lives, a child who had run away from the knowledge, telling no one, and the night came, a night of screams and death. Guilt rose within her, its specter visage hauntingly familiar. After all these years, its face still held the power to shatter her world, making hollow those things she needed solid. rattling her illusions of security with a shame almost 200 years old. But she is interrupted, right? When she stiffened in her chair as a cold presence washed over her from behind, slowly Tattersail turned. Sorry for not giving you warning, Quickben said, emerging from a swirling cloud of his warren. It held a strange, spicy scent. Company's coming, he said, seeming distracted. I've called Hairlock. He comes by Warren. And the situation's just become a lot more complicated. Now we are back with Whiskey Jack. The wind flung rain across Whiskey Jack's face. Faintly through the dark night, the fourth bell clanged. Sergeant pulled his rain cape tighter and warily shifted his stance. The view from the rooftop and the palace's east turret was mostly obscured by sheets of rain. You've been chewing on something for days, he said to the man beside him. Let's hear it, soldier. And Fiddler wiped the rain from his eyes and squinted into the east. Not much to tell you, Sarge, he said gruffly. Just feelings. That sorcerer's for one. And we get to learn a little bit about Fiddler here. I ain't no fighter, not like that anyway. Was born in an alley in Mala City. Learned the stone-cutting trade breaking into barrows up in the plain behind Mock's Hold. He used to be a stone-cutter, too, just like me. Only I'm no fast learner and soldiering like you was. It was the ranks of the mines for me. Sometimes I think I went and made the wrong choice. And this is kind of echoing back to what we just learned about Tattersail in the previous section, when Sapper says, or Fiddler says, she's got some old demons riding in her is my guess, and they're closing in. Whiskey Jack grunted. It's rare you'll find a mage with a pleasant past, he said. Story was she wasn't recruited, she was on the run. She's been offered the title of High Mage more than once, but she won't accept it. It doesn't show, but a head-to-head between her and Tashrin would be a close thing. She's a master of a warren. You don't acquire that with a weak spine. Something's about to be unleashed tonight, Sergeant. It's going to be messy. And then we are reunited with High Fist Dujek One Arm as he emerges, the light from the room below a broken beacon rising around him. He cleared the ladder's last rung and stepped off the roof. Give me a hand with the damn door here, he called to the two men. Don't quibble with words, Dujek muttered. Damn it, Fiddler, is that your sword lying over there in a puddle? Breath hissed between Fiddler's teeth, and he hurried over to the weapon. The man's a hopeless legend, Dujek said. Shed anew will bless his hide. He paused, seeming to reorder his thoughts. Okay, perish the thought then. You didn't kill Perrin, so where is he? And we find out they are looking for him. We also learn something else about Perrin when Dujek's talking about. It's possible, Dujek conceded without much conviction. In any case, he's to command your squad, and not just for this mission. The assignment's permanent. Whiskey Jack asks, is the Darujistan infiltration his own idea? No, but whose it is anybody's guess. Maybe the adjunct to the Empress herself. So what all that means is we're sending you in anyway. He scowled briefly. I'm to relay the final details to you. He faced the sergeant, assuming Perrin is gone for good. Here we get a very clear reminder of basically everybody's role in the story. So it's Whiskey Jack. He's thinking about this when he thinks whatever was happening thousands of leagues away was being played out here. Such was Empire, and it always would be, no matter the place or the people. They were all instruments blind to the hands shaping them. So at least we have a realization here from a character within the story. It's all things we already know, right? Everybody's a pawn. Everybody's being used for grander designs that are outside of their control. But then the High Fist continues with, there's pressure to disband the bridge burners. I've already received the orders to merge the 2nd with the 5th and 6th. If you and your squad come out of Darujistan alive, Sergeant, you have my permission to just walk. Cool. All right. Finally, they get to desert. These guys need to just leave if they survive this battle. And Whiskey Jack remained silent, his thoughts a whirling maelstrom. Desertion. That word rang in his head like a dirge. Oh, and we also learned, too, that Dujek used to be under him when there'd been a time when Dujek had called Whiskey Jack, sir. No, Whiskey Jack held no grudges. He knew that Dujek still had trouble accepting the change of fortunes. If the time came, Whiskey Jack intended to be at One Arm's side. So, regardless of their change in position, Whiskey Jack respects it. And then we end this chapter with Dujek saying, well, here they come. And Whiskey Jack looked up, followed the High Fist gaze into the eastern sky. And I believe we are going to follow up with the Moranth, right? These strange creatures in these chitinous armor riding these bug things, these quarrels. And now we are back with Quickben and Tattersail. Quickben cocked his head, then hissed through his teeth. The hounds have caught his trail, he said. And we get to see the outcome of that very soon. The trail which led down into the Warren of Shadow. Hairlock had reached the very gates of the Shadow Realm, and then he had gone beyond. Kalam he's pacing before the sorceress, and he stops and faces her. What about Tashrin? He asked gruffly, his hands twitching. You know, something has happened. He's hunting, but the quarry eludes him. She smiled up at the assassin. I feel him moving cautiously, very cautiously. For all he knows, the quarry might be a rabbit. Or a hound, Kalam responds. More conjecture from Tattersall when she's thinking about, was this what Hairlock was doing? Drawing a hound after him? Were they all leading Tayshrin into a deadly ambush? And this is when they are talking about Perrin. By all rights, Captain Perrin should be in an officer's hole with 5 feet of mud on his pretty face. He nodded to Kalam, who had joined him. The first wound was fatal. Up under his heart, a professional thrust. He added with a meaningful look at the assassin. The second would have done him more slowly, but no less certain. So he should be dead. He isn't, which means intervention, Tattersall answered, a queasy feeling settling in her stomach, her heavy-lidded gaze fixed on Mallet. Your denoual skill proved sufficient? And the healer smiles. It was easy. I had help, he explained. The wounds were already closing, the damage already mended. I quickened it some, but that's all. There's been a deep trauma, both body and mind. By all rights, it should be weeks before he recovers physically. And that alone could be a problem. So this, again, is one of those chapters I was talking about where we know all of this already. I guess we know his mental state, his physical state. We know that there was intervention. But we're kind of processing that yet again through the processes of these characters who did not witness the event like we did. Of course, Tattersall's smile faded as she's thinking of Captain Perrin. He's going to be used, she pronounced flatly, like a sword. Of course he is. Of course he is. A pawn, a chosen one, perhaps for the wrong side. Of course, we shall see. Finally, Quick Ben, he stands up. He says, Hairlock will be gone for some time. Those hounds are stubborn. Maybe a while before he can shake them, or the worst comes to the worst. The wizard grinned darkly. He'll turn on them and give them a Shadow Lord something to think about. They had a mission ahead of them, one that would take them right to the heart of Darujistan. That city was next on the Empire's list, the last free city, the continent's lone gem worthy enough to covet. The squad would infiltrate, prepare the way. And this is when we get a great description of the Moranth, the Black Moranth. With dawn, a blade-thin crimson streak at their backs, the Black Moranth crouching on the high saddles of their quarrel mounts, glittering like diamonds, slick with blood, Whiskey Jack, Fiddler, and the High Fist watched the dozen flyers approach. So these are strange creatures indeed, and we have a pretty good description here. Though he had ridden their backs before, they continued to fascinate him. The winged creatures balanced on 4 thin legs emerging from beneath the saddles. They waited on the rooftop with wings splayed out and quivering fast enough to create a haze of water droplets suspended around them. Their long, oddly segmented tails jutted straight out behind them, multi-hued and 20 feet in length. Whiskey Jack's nostrils twitched as the now familiar acrid scent reached him. The nearest quarrel's enormous wedge-shaped head was dominated by faceted eyes and articulating mandibles. 2 additional limbs, arms you suppose, were tucked underneath. But even the Moranth themselves are kind of in question, right? When he's thinking about, we know so little about these Moranth. No one has ever seen their cities in the forest. I can't even tell their sex. But next, Whiskey Jack's momentary relief was shattered by what he only now realized with a secret hope that Sari had deserted. So his men had found her after all, or she had found them. Either way, his veterans did not sound happy to see her. He couldn't blame them. Had she tried to kill Perrin? Maybe. That seemed to be the suspicion of Quick Ben and Kalam. The memory returned to Whiskey Jack as he considered Dujek's words. On a brief attachment of the 5th, away from the siege and Pale, in the midst of the Mott campaign, Sari had joined them from the new troops arriving at Nathalog. He'd watched her put a knife to 3 local mercenaries they'd taken prisoner in Grey Dog, ostensibly to glean information, he recalled with a shudder. It had been nothing like that, not an act of expedience. He had been aghast, horrified, as Sari set to work on their loins. Though the woman had been in the squad for 2 years, still his men called her a recruit, and they would probably do so until the day she died. There was meaning there, and Whiskey Jack understood it well. Recruits were not bridge burners. The stripping away of that label was an earned thing, a recognition brought by deeds. Sari was a recruit because the thought of having her inextricably enfolded within the bridge burners burned like a hot knife in the throat of everyone in his squad. And that was something which the sergeant himself was not immune. Young? No, you can't forgive the young. You can answer their simple needs, and you can look in their eyes and find enough there that is recognizable. But her? No. Best to avoid those eyes, in which there was nothing that was young. So that's, we know that when we first met Sari through the perspective of different people, We felt her old eyes. And so this is another section where it's all stuff we know. It's all stuff we've seen. We know exactly what's going on. I do appreciate the fact that we're getting this through the lens of a character, but it's very repetitious. And this is our first animal POV section. We have a great description of the city of Pale. I'm not going to get into it, but it's raining and it's pouring and it's dark. It's ominous. It's mysterious. And down one aisle, winding south along the outer wall, loped a dog the size of a mule, which I believe that in chapter 1, like I said, somebody said the dogs would have to been the size of mules to take out these soldiers and these people. The hound marked 7th among the Shadow Throne servants and called Gear hunted. So I wonder if that's like a steroid joke. No, you guys don't get it. You know, they usually call steroids Gear, and he's a big hound. Anyway, I will move on. But he's hunting, right? He spots these soldiers and he's going for them. Anticipation and pleasure surged through the hound. He had found the trail's end. Lowering his head again, he moved, his gait and wavering on the 4 guards. And this is exactly where we see the outcome. This next brief chapter, it switches POV from these guards, and we see them get destroyed when he says, "Look at that dog," the young soldier said. "We hear you," said the new man. "Life in the second. Look at that dog," the young Marine repeated. The others turned to look up the street. The old guard stared, his eyes widening. Then he hissed a curse and fumbled with his pike. None of the others managed even that much before the hound was upon them. So this is kind of I don't know, man. Part of me, it's cool to see the POV shift. A part of me is like, do we really need to see both? Do we really need to see the POV of the hound stalking these streets and then cut to these soldiers? It is very much like a film, right? In that fact where a lot of times we have these scenes that are set aside from the main POV scenes that are just for effect. But I don't know. It feels like, again, that's kind of how this book is written, though. It's like we're getting every little single beat of stuff. And that's okay because it's not uninteresting, right? It's interesting to read, but it is very rich with detail. And we are back with Tattersail. Sleepless, Tattersail lay flat on her back on the bed in the outer room. Her exhaustion had reached a point where even sleep eluded her, so she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts wandering in a disordered review of the past 7 days. Despite her initial anger at being embroiled in the bridge burners' schemes, she had to acknowledge the excitement she felt. The bridge burners, after all, had shown again and again that they could take care of their own affairs. No, she wanted to see Tatrin pulled down. And who do we see? Well, our little puppet, our favorite Mr. Pinocchio, Hairlock shows up again. "Safe and sound," Hairlock said. "Sorry to disappoint you, Sail." The marionette waved one tiny gloved hand, and the door behind him closed, its latch falling into place. But even though he thinks, "Hey, I'm cool. I went through these warrens, these other warrens, these secret passages in the warrens. No worries. I got away from the hounds." And of course, what happens? Tattersail stood by the bed, hesitating. Wood shattered below, and the building shook. Men shrieked, weapons clanged. The sorceress pushed herself upright, terror seeping into her limbs like molten lead. "Destroy a hound of shadow." Heavy thumps rattled the window, as of bodies being flung aside on the floor below. Then the thumps reached the foot of the stairs, and the screaming stopped. From the compound, she heard soldiers shouting. "Here we go." The hound appeared, its eyes yellow flames, the muscles of its high shoulders taut, rippling under its skin. A white strip flashed above the hound's eyes as its lid snapped back, and then it charges. And then as the hound sprang into the air, jaws open and reaching for her head, a wave of gray light struck the beast to the side, throwing it into the bed of Tattersail's right. Wood crunched. With a grunt, the hound was up again, wheeling this time to face Hairlock, who stood perched atop his box, glistening with sweat and arms raised. Wait, he's sweating? He's a sweating puppet? "Oh yes, Gear," he shrilled. "I'm your quarry." But what happens? Our hero, our chosen one, shows up. None of the three notice the door to the inner bedroom opening off to the left, or the halting appearance of Captain Perrin. He's wearing a blanket down to his ankles. He's pale and drawn. The man moved forward, a blank cast in his eyes, which were fixed on the hound. As the invisible battle of wills continued between Gear and Hairlock, Perrin stepped closer. The blanket parted, revealing a longsword, point flashing outward as it extended into a full lunge. The sword sank into Gear's chest, even as the man leapt back, withdrawing the lunge, twisting the weapon as he pulled it clear. So this hound's destroying everybody. Nobody can handle him. He's about to kill Tattersail, about to, I guess, kill Hairlock. And then Perrin just walks in after his wounds, completely destroyed. He just puts his blanket aside and stabs this thing, and that's it. And he says, the captain looked down at it. Just lucky, I guess. So we know he's a pawn. We know what's going on. He is a superhero now, maybe? I don't know. I'm interested to see how this is going to play out. And of course, Hairlock, I am returning to my box, Hairlock said, scrambling. Expect Tatron here in any minute. You'll say nothing, sorceress. He clambered inside. Nothing. The lid slammed shut. She tried to move, but it seemed that a chill had come into her limbs. Within her mind, visions floated, but walls of darkness closed in around them before they could register. She felt herself fading. A man's voice spoke close by, urgent. What do you hear? She frowned, trying to concentrate. Then she smiled. A spinning coin. I hear a spinning coin. So I love that ending. I love it. It was great. It was a chapter that felt longer than the others, but again, I don't think it was. A lot of stuff happened. Things are ramping up. It was a great conclusion. We're introduced to the sort of the afterlife or the other world or the death world or whatever it may be. We know Perrin is going to be a chosen one. He's literally brought back from the dead. He's got this sword that apparently can take these hounds down. Everyone is working together as a unit, and we are headed to Darujistan. So for next week, please join me for chapters 5 and 6. I think we can do both. Might be a little bit longer of a video, but I am told they're about half the length of the chapters we've been reading. So hopefully it's not too much. Let me know your thoughts. What are you thinking of part 1 of this book so far? Chapters 1 through 4. I felt like it was a nice chunk, a very detailed chunk, but I feel like despite any reservations I had about reading this book so far, I feel that Steven Erikson is putting things in perspective. He's reminding us of things more often than I expected, to be honest with you. And I think that's very helpful for a first-time reader, despite sort of my opinions on the matter of things being repeated too much. But again, it's a lot of information to digest and take in, and a lot of characters, clearly, right? We have many POVs here. So let us see where this book goes. Thanks for hanging out. I know these are long videos. Don't forget, if you would like to join the discussion, we have a Discord channel dedicated. Check the link in the description. All right, well, I will see you next week with chapters 5 and 6.